So I want you to just picture this. The year is 1925.
Okay.
You are standing in the Amazon rainforest. The air is just incredibly thick, right? Like suffocatingly humid.
Oh, absolutely. The kind of heat that just completely drains you.
Exactly. And it is loud. The jungle is just deafening with bugs and birds. And into this massive, unexplored, green canopy steps a 57-year-old British explorer.
Right, Percy Fawcett.
Yep, Percy
Oh,
Fawcett.
yeah.
And he's got his 21-year-old son with him and a young friend of his son's. And they just step past the tree line into what European maps at the time literally just labeled as a blank space.
Just a total void on the map.
A total void. And then they vanish.
Poof. Gone.
Gone. I mean,
Oh.
no bodies, no definitive answers, just a century of rumors, all these contradictory sightings, and this massive historical mystery that people have been obsessed with ever since.
It really is one of the most enduring and just confounding mysteries of the entire 20th century. I mean, you have this highly publicized expedition. Right?
Oh, huge. Everyone was watching.
Right. Led by a man who was, for all intents and purposes, a celebrity in the exploration world.
Yeah.
And he is just completely swallowed up by the jungle.
Which triggered a global obsession.
It really did. That silence from the jungle just drove people crazy.
Which is exactly what we are plunging into today on this deep dive. We're unpacking the life, the really bizarre theories, and the chilling disappearance of Lieutenant Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett.
It's a heavy one.
It is. We are going to sift through all these conflicting accounts of his final days, look at the desperate rescue missions that happened afterward, and really get into the ultimate heartbreaking irony of what he was actually looking for.
Because what he was looking for, well, the reality of it is wild.
It totally is. I like to think of this as an analog era true crime cold case, but scaled up to the size of the entire Amazon basin.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. And in this scenario, the jungle itself is essentially the prime suspect.
And investigating that suspect means we have to completely reframe how we view the Amazon. Because while his vanishing act became legendary, I mean, literally providing the template for Indiana Jones, the mechanics of his disappearance are so deeply tied to this clash between European assumptions and the harsh reality of the rainforest.
Because the rainforest doesn't care about your assumptions.
Exactly. It operates on its own brutal biological logic.
But before we can even really understand how a man just, evaporates off the face of the earth, I feel like we need to understand who he was. We have to look at the obsessive quest that drove him into that green abyss in the first place.
We really do. You have to start with the man himself.
Right. So who is Percy Fawcett? Looking at his background, he was born back in 1867. Over in Torquay, England.
So very traditional upper crust Victorian background.
Exactly. He's a Royal Artillery officer. He actually worked for the British Secret Service in North Africa for a bit. And then he becomes a surveyor for the Royal Geographical Society.
And we really should contextualize the Royal Geographical Society, or the RGS, for that era. Because today, we have satellites mapping every square inch of the globe.
Right. You just pull up an app on your phone.
Exactly. But in the early 1900s, the RGS were the absolute arbiters of global discovery. They were sending men to the poles, to the deep interiors of Africa, to South America, all to map those remaining blank spaces.
They were the gatekeepers of the unknown.
They really were. And Fawcett, he wasn't just some tourist in a pith helmet, He was sent to South America initially in 1906 as a neutral third party to map this really volatile, disputed border between Brazil and Bolivia.
So he had real skills.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He was a professional cartographer with serious, rigorous scientific credentials.
Okay, sure. He had the credentials. But his track record starts to get a little complicated because between 1906 and 1924, he makes 7 expeditions into the Amazon.
7, which is just staggering.
The physical toll of that is unimaginable to me. I mean, he survives things that routinely killed other explorers. But then you look at the reports he brings back from these trips, and they raise some serious red flags.
It certainly raised eyebrows back then, too.
Right. I mean, he claims he shot a 62-foot giant anaconda. He reports seeing dog-sized cats. He mentions dogs with double noses. And honestly, my personal nightmare, this giant venomous spider called the Apizaka spider.
Yeah, the Apizaka is a fun one.
The scientific community at the time actually openly ridiculed him for some of this. So I have to ask you, does a 62-foot snake suggest a visionary explorer who's just encountering the bizarre extremes of an uncharted ecosystem? Or is he just a fabulist who's losing his grip on reality?
That is basically the central tension of Fawcett's entire character.
Yeah.
And the truth is, much more nuanced than him just being crazy or a liar.
Okay, so break that down for me.
Well, yes, a 62-foot anaconda stretches biological credulity to the breaking point. The physical mechanics of a snake that large, just how it would pump blood, the sheer caloric intake it would need, the structural integrity of its spine when it's out of the water, it's highly improbable based on modern herpetology.
Right. What's the biggest one we know of?
The largest recorded anacondas usually top out around 30 feet, maybe a bit more. But, and this is key, we have to look closely at his other claims, because some of his seemingly outrageous reports actually had a solid basis in reality.
Wait, really? Which ones? Please don't tell me the giant spider is real.
Well, let's look at the double-nosed dogs first. He reported seeing these in the deep interior, and for decades people thought it was a complete myth, just a crazy jungle story.
It sounds like a myth.
It does. But it turns out there is a real documented breed down there called the Andean tiger hound, or the double-nosed Andean tiger hound.
No way. It actually has two noses.
It has a genetic mutation that causes a bifurcated nose. The nostrils are literally split down the middle by a band of skin and hair, so it genuinely looks like two separate noses.
Oh, wow. So he wasn't making that up.
He wasn't. He also reported finding these giant peanuts in the Mato Grosso region. People laughed at him in London. But later, botanists went down there and identified a real species of massive legumes in that exact area.
So he really is just observing flora and fauna that European science literally hasn't cataloged yet.
Exactly. He's operating at the absolute edge of known biology.
So he's seeing things that are so strange, his brain might just be struggling to process them, which maybe leads to some exaggeration on things like the snake, but he's not entirely inventing things out of thin air.
Precisely. But to understand why he might exaggerate or just why he viewed the jungle the way he did, we have to look at his psychology. Because Fawcett was a highly complex, somewhat contradictory guy.
Definitely not your standard stoic military man.
Not at all. He was heavily influenced by the occult. His older brother, Edward Douglas Fawcett, was this really prominent Eastern occultist, philosopher, and author. And Percy himself had a very deep streak of mysticism.
I remember reading he was involved in theosophy, right?
Yes. Theosophy was a very popular esoteric movement at the time. It kind of blended Eastern philosophy, spiritualism, and this belief in ancient hidden masters.
Which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. If you deeply believe the world is full of hidden spiritual truths, you're probably way more primed to believe a giant spider or a massive anaconda is lurking out in the jungle.
Your worldview allows for the impossible.
Exactly. But there's another layer here too, right? His military service.
Oh, a massive layer. Over the course of his early Amazon expeditions, he developed incredible physical resilience. But then World War I broke out.
And he went back to fight.
He went back to Europe and commanded an artillery brigade in Flanders. I mean, he was in his late 40s at this point, fighting in some of the most horrific, muddy, catastrophic conditions in human history.
The trenches.
Yes. He saw countless men just blown apart around him. And he survived, without a scratch, really. When you combine his survival in the deadliest parts of the Amazon with his survival of the absolute meat grinder of World War I, it seems to have forged this dangerous psychological armor.
He built up this personal mythology of invincibility.
Right. He felt chosen.
Like the normal rules of biology and ballistics just didn't apply to him anymore. Which honestly perfectly brings us to the actual catalyst for his final fatal journey, because he's not going in just to draw maps anymore.
No, the mapping days were over.
He's looking for something very specific. And it all hinges on this one single document housed at the National Library in Rio de Janeiro, Manuscript 512.
Manuscript 512 is basically the holy grail of South American exploration lore.
So the text dates back to 1753. It was written by this Portuguese bandeirante named João da Silva Guimarães. And the manuscript describes a group of explorers pushing into the Bahia region and finding the ruins of an ancient, massive city.
A literal lost city.
Right. It details stone arches, a giant statue, temples with hieroglyphs, paved roads. It literally reads like an Indiana Jones script. And Fawcett just becomes utterly obsessed with this document.
It consumed him.
He formulates this grand theory that a highly advanced ancient civilization once existed right in the middle of the Amazon basin. And he names this ultimate goal the Lost City of Z.
We really need to unpack who these bandeirantes were, though, to understand why relying on this manuscript is so problematic.
Yeah, who were they exactly?
Well, the bandeirantes were essentially Portuguese fortune hunters. They were slavers, prospectors, guys who roamed the deep interior of Brazil in the 17th and 18th centuries looking for gold, silver, and indigenous populations to enslave.
So not exactly objective scientists.
Not at all. They were tough, brutal men. So when Guimarães wrote this manuscript, he was describing a landscape through a very specific 18th century European lens.
Meaning, when he saw ruins, he described them in terms he understood.
Exactly. Look at the specific details of that manuscript. Stone arches, statues, hieroglyphs, paved roads.
All very Roman or Egyptian concepts.
Right. These are European, or at the very least Mesoamerican, concepts of what a civilization looks like. The author is projecting a specific architectural expectation onto the Amazon basin.
And Fawcett just swallows this whole.
Hook, line, and sinker.
He is looking for a literal stone city in a rainforest. He expects to find something resembling ancient Rome or the Maya hidden under the canopy.
Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of the environment.
And to find this stone city, he's relying on some incredibly unconventional tools. He wasn't just bringing theodolites and compasses. He actually carried a 10-inch basalt or jade statue of a human figure. It had inscriptions on its chest and feet.
The famous jade idol.
Yeah. He claimed it was given to him by the writer H. Rider Haggard, and Fawcett genuinely believed this object had supernatural powers. He even told a Brazilian general that by simply showing the statue to people, he could exercise an irresistible mystical power over the indigenous tribes.
Which perfectly illustrates that theosophical streak we discussed earlier. He is blending rigorous Victorian cartography with deep esoteric occultism.
It's such a weird mix.
It is. He deeply believes his destiny is intertwined with this city.
No.
And honestly, this belief is the only way to explain his capacity to endure unbelievable physical hardships. Let's just look at his 1920s solo attempt to find Z.
Oh, man. This part blew my mind when I was reading the sources. So in 1920, he goes in with 2 colleagues. But those 2 guys just couldn't handle the physical toll, the insects, the heat, the disease, and they turned back.
Sensible decision on their part.
Very sensible. But Fawcett refuses to quit. He pushes on completely alone. He just wanders the jungle until he is struck down by a severe fever. He gets so weak and delirious that he is forced to shoot his own pack animal, his horse, just to survive the retreat because he can't manage it anymore.
And we should talk about what that fever really means. The mechanics of a jungle fever like malaria or dengue are devastating.
It's not just a bad cold.
No, your body is oscillating wildly between freezing chills and boiling heat. Your joints ache like they are literally breaking. Dehydration sets in rapidly. The fact that he managed to navigate his way back to civilization while suffering from that totally alone, having to kill his only mode of transport. It's a staggering feat of human endurance.
But what's crazy to me is his takeaway from that experience. Because for anyone else, almost dying of a fever and shooting your horse in the mud would be the end. You'd say, okay, I am never doing this again.
Right, time to retire.
Exactly. But Fawcett's takeaway was, I need to come back. It really sets the stakes for his final push. It wasn't just a geographic survey anymore. It was a crusade.
And crusades, as we know, often demand secrecy. Because he was so utterly convinced he was right about Z, and because he believed finding it would be the greatest archaeological discovery of the century, he became deeply, deeply paranoid.
He thought everyone was out to get him.
He believed rival explorers, American institutions, other geographers were all actively trying to steal his glory, so he guarded his coordinates fiercely.
That paranoia perfectly sets the stage for the 1925 expedition. So he's armed with his map, his jade statue, and this unbreakable and maybe fatal belief in Z. He assembles his team. And when I was looking at the manifest for this final trip, I was genuinely shocked.
Surprisingly small.
It's tiny. He's going into completely uncharted, hostile territory. And the team he puts together seems dangerously, almost comically inadequate.
It was a massive departure from the standard exploration protocols of the era. If you look at early 20th century exploration, think of Ernest Shackleton in the Antarctic or Theodore Roosevelt's River of Doubt expedition in the Amazon. The logistics are massive.
You're talking armies of people.
Exactly. Armies of porters, tons of supplies, specialized riverboats, supply depots laid out months in advance.
And what does Fawcett do? He leaves Cuiabá, Brazil on April 20th, 1925 with a tiny group. It's just Fawcett, who is now 57 years old, his eldest son, Jack, who is 21, and Jack's longtime friend, Raleigh Rimmel.
Just 3 Englishmen.
Plus 2 Brazilian laborers to help manage the livestock. And the livestock is just 2 horses, 8 mules, and 2 dogs. That's it. 3 white guys, 2 locals, and some mules.
The caloric math alone on that setup is terrifying.
Because they have to clear the jungle as they go, right?
Yes. In the deep Amazon, just cutting a trail with a machete through thick undergrowth in 100-degree heat with near 100% humidity. You can burn upwards of 6,000 calories a day.
Wow. 6,000.
Easily. So you either have to carry the food to support that level of exertion, or you have to spend hours hunting and foraging every single day, which slows your progress to an absolute crawl. A party of 3 white men simply cannot carry enough provisions to sustain themselves for a multi-month journey without a massive support network.
You know what it reminds me of? It's like when a modern tech startup pivots to a lean model.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Like, they fire all the support staff to be agile and move fast. And sure, they can maneuver quickly, but they have completely eliminated their runway. They have no capital, no resources, and absolutely no backup plan to survive a major crisis. One bad pivot, one unexpected obstacle, and the whole company just goes under.
It's a really apt analogy, because Fawcett's strategy, which he explicitly defended in his writings, was that traveling light with a tiny group would allow them to live off the land. And more importantly to him, it would avoid drawing hostile attention from the indigenous tribes.
He thought a big group looked like a threat.
Exactly. He argued that an army of porters looks like an invading military force, which naturally invites an attack. 3 white men, however, just look like a harmless curiosity. Plus, he wanted to travel fast to outpace any European competitors.
He was so obsessed with those competitors that he actually left an incredibly strict, terrifying instruction behind. He told his family and his backers, if we do not return, no rescue expedition should be sent.
None. Do not come looking.
He explicitly said that rescuers would just suffer the exact same fate.
It's an incredible psychological burden to place on his wife and family back in England. He is essentially saying, if we go dark, consider us dead. Do not look for us.
He preemptively severed the safety net.
And they did go dark, but not immediately, because we actually have one final communication from the expedition.
The famous Dead Horse Camp letter.
Yes. It's a letter written on May 29th, 1925. It was delivered back to civilization by one of the native guides before that guide turned back. Fawcett writes from a place he calls Dead Horse Camp.
Which, ominously enough, is the exact geographic spot where he had been forced to shoot his horse during that failed 1920s solo trip. It was the physical boundary of his previous failure.
Right. But despite the grim name of the camp, the tone of the letter is remarkably upbeat. He writes to his wife, Nina. He details the hardships they've faced, the swarms of insects, the exhaustion. He does express some serious doubts about Raleigh Rimmel's physical condition, though.
Right, Rimmel's foot.
Rimmel's foot was severely swollen from tick bites. But overall, Fawcett is optimistic. We should probably pause on Rimmel's foot for a second, because a tick bite in the Amazon isn't like getting a tick bite in a temperate forest in North America or Europe.
No.
Not at all. The risk of secondary bacterial infection in that level of heat and humidity is just astronomical. Any open wound becomes a breeding ground for staph or strep bacteria, which can quickly lead to cellulitis or even full-blown sepsis if it's left untreated.
Which they couldn't treat.
Right. Having a swollen, infected foot while trying to hike through jungle terrain is practically a death sentence if you can't stop and rest.
Yet, despite his companion limping along with a swollen, infected foot, Fawcett notes, they're crossing the upper Xingu, which is a southeastern tributary of the Amazon, and he ends the letter with these famous, really haunting last words. You need have no fear of any failure.
Absolute chilling confidence right before stepping off the edge of the map.
But this is where I get really confused by the mechanics of what he was doing, because the mystery actually begins in the paperwork before they even disappear.
The coordinate discrepancy.
Yes. In that final letter to his wife, Fawcett gives his coordinates as 11 degrees 43 minutes south, 54 degrees 35 minutes west. But in a dispatch he sent at the exact same time to the North American Newspaper Alliance, which was actually funding part of the trip he gave the coordinates, as 13 degrees 43 minutes south.
A difference of 2 full degrees of latitude.
2 degrees? How does a professional cartographer make a mistake like that? 2 degrees is, what, over 100 miles?
It's roughly 140 miles of difference.
Yeah.
And in the dense Amazon canopy, 140 miles might as well be on another planet.
So it couldn't have been a mistake.
Almost certainly not. The mechanics of celestial navigation at the time involved using a theodolite, or a sextant, to measure the angle of the sun or stars relative to the horizon, and then comparing that to a chronometer. Fawcett was a master at this. He literally did it for a living. So a 2-degree error isn't a slip of the pen or a slight miscalculation. It is massive.
So it had to be deliberate misdirection.
Yeah.
Right.
Given his profound paranoia about rival explorers, it is highly probable that he was deliberately laying a false trail. He likely gave the newspaper syndicate a fake location to throw competitors off the scent, knowing those coordinates would be published in the press. He trusted his wife with the real coordinates.
Or, I mean, looking at it from another really dark angle, perhaps he gave his wife the false ones too.
Knowing her letters might be intercepted.
Exactly, to absolutely enforce his strict no rescue orders, because if you can't find the starting line, you can't run the race.
He ensured that if anyone did try to follow him, they'd be looking at a haystack 140 miles away from the needle.
And that was it. Those hopeful last words, the conflicting coordinates. That was the absolute last the outside world ever heard of Percy Fawcett, Jack, and Raleigh Rimmel.
The silence that followed was deafening, and it slowly morphed into one of the most obsessive geographical mysteries of the 20th century.
The RGS officially declared the men lost in January 1927, so nearly 2 years after that final letter. And that official declaration basically fired the starting gun for a massive media frenzy.
Which birthed a whole lot of mythology.
Oh, totally. There's this pervasive myth that pops up in pulp magazines and later articles, this idea that 100 rescuers died in the jungle looking for Fawcett over the next few decades. It makes the Amazon sound like this cursed graveyard that just ate rescue teams.
The rescue myth makes for great sensationalism, for sure. The idea of a cursed expedition swallowing up hundreds of brave souls fits perfectly into the green hell narrative of the Amazon that was popular then.
But it's not true.
Not at all. The historical reality is quite different. The actual logistics of mounting a rescue mission were so prohibitively expensive and genuinely dangerous that very few people actually attempted it. Records show that only one lone searcher actually died attempting to find him.
Just one. But the people who did try were fascinating characters themselves. I mean, in 1927, you had George Miller Diet.
The English explorer.
Right. He went in heavily armed, and he came back claiming he found evidence Fawcett was killed by the Alawique tribe, but he couldn't actually produce concrete proof, and most geographers didn't buy his story.
It was heavily disputed.
And then, in the 1930s, you have Aloha Wanderwell. This is wild. She actually flew a seaplane trying to land on the Paraguay River to spot them from the air. She lived with the Baro tribe for 6 weeks before running out of fuel and giving up. Everyone just wanted the glory of solving the riddle.
And in the absolute vacuum of facts, human nature just rushes in to fill the void with theories. When you strip away the sensationalism from the press, the theories regarding the fate of the Fawcett expedition essentially boil down to a few core possibilities, ranging from the mundane and tragic to the highly conspiratorial.
Let's follow the evidence on those. The most grounded theory, the one that honestly makes the most logistical sense to me, is that they just succumbed to starvation and the elements.
The environment one?
Right. And what's interesting is that this theory was heavily championed by Henry Costin. He was Fawcett's trusted companion on 5 of his previous expeditions. So if anyone knew what Fawcett was capable of, it was Costin.
Costin's analysis is vital here. He understood Fawcett's immense stamina, but he also understood the physical laws of the jungle. Costin strongly doubted that Fawcett would have been murdered by indigenous tribes.
Why is that?
Because he noted that Fawcett had a long track record of amicable, patient, and peaceful relations with native peoples. Costin believed the jungle simply won. He pointed to the inevitable reality of exhaustion, disease, or lack of food.
But how does starvation actually happen in an environment that is just teeming with life? I mean, people imagine the jungle is full of fruit and animals everywhere you look.
It's a very common misconception.
Yeah.
Yes, the Amazon is incredibly biodiverse, but the biomass is mostly locked up in the canopy, hundreds of feet in the air. Or it's in forms that are toxic or inaccessible to humans unless you have deep, generational indigenous knowledge.
You can't just pick a berry and eat it.
Exactly. If you don't know exactly which nuts are safe, how to process toxic cassava, or how to hunt canopy monkeys with a blowgun, you will starve while completely surrounded by green. Add to that the physical decline of the party. The last sightings by indigenous people noted that both Jack and Raleigh Rimmel were lame and ill.
Right, Rimmel had that severely infected foot.
You have a 57-year-old man and 2 sick 20-somethings with minimal supplies heading into unforgiving terrain. The Kalapala tribe, who lived in the region, later reported that they saw the 3 men head east into hostile territory, and after 5 days, the expedition's campfire smoke just stopped appearing above the canopy.
Wow.
It's a quiet, grim end. A fire that simply doesn't get lit one night.
But that silence leaves a lot of room for the second major theory, that they were killed by indigenous peoples. They were entering territory heavily populated by various tribes, the Kalapalas, the Arumas, the Suyas, and the Zavantes. When Dayat went in, he immediately assumed the tribes did it.
Which brings up a dark reality about jungle diplomacy, doesn't it? This is where we need to look at the deeply analytical work of explorer and historian John Hemming. Because Hemming strips away all the romanticism and looks at the brutal logistics and the diplomatic protocols of the Xingu region.
Okay, what does Hemming say?
Hemming points out that Fawcett committed a fatal compounding error. First, as we discussed, a party of 3 is simply too small to sustain itself. You need an absolute minimum of 8 men just to cut the trail, hunt, and make camp effectively.
Because they were so understaffed, they were entirely dependent on the hospitality of the indigenous tribes they encountered for food, shelter, directions, everything.
Precisely. And here is the mechanical failure of Fawcett's plan. The tribes of the Xingu region operate on a cultural economy heavily based on reciprocity and generosity.
Meaning you trade for things.
Right. If you visit their village, they are obligated by their culture to feed you and house you. But they absolutely expect gifts in return. It's not just polite, it's the fundamental basis of their diplomatic and economic system. Previous and subsequent explorers brought copious amounts of trade goods, steel machetes, knives, fishhooks, glass beads.
But the historical record states, unequivocally, Fawcett brought virtually no gifts.
None.
Which is wild. You might be thinking, how does a highly trained, elite explorer who survived 7 previous trips just forget the most basic rule of jungle diplomacy? It sounds insane, right? He knew how the system worked. Was he just financially ruined and couldn't afford machetes? Or was it blinding arrogance?
It was likely a fatal cocktail of both financial constraints, his obsession with traveling light, and his deep-seated esoteric arrogance.
The jade idol again.
Exactly. Remember his statement about that statue? He literally believed he possessed a supernatural authority. He thought he didn't need trade goods because he had spiritual leverage over the native populations. He expected the indigenous hosts to just look after them out of sheer deference.
It's the ultimate colonial hubris. You don't walk into someone's house, eat their food, demand their help, and offer absolutely nothing in return.
Especially when you are simultaneously demanding that they provide guides to take you into the territory of their traditional enemies. Hemming concludes that this lack of tact, the failure to reciprocate, and the drain on the village's food supply would have deeply antagonized their hosts. In a survival environment, a guest who consumes but doesn't contribute quickly becomes a threat.
Which perfectly aligns with the conflicting oral histories of the Kalapalo people themselves. Because the story keeps changing depending on who is doing the asking and when.
The narratives are very fluid.
Decades after the disappearance, a Kalapalo chief named Komatsi, and earlier, his predecessor Izarari essentially bragged about murdering the expedition.
The accounts provided by those chiefs were vivid, though they completely contradicted each other in the specifics.
How so?
Well, one version claimed Chief Izarari shot Fawcett and Jack with arrows after Fawcett became belligerent and physically attacked the tribesmen when they refused to give him guides to enter Shavante territory.
And the other version?
Another version claimed Izarari killed all 3 men with a heavy club the morning after Jack had allegedly consorted with one of the chief's wives, and Fawcett had slapped the chief in the face over a dispute about canoes.
Slapping a tribal chief in the face when you are starving and utterly dependent on him. Again, staggering arrogance, if true.
If true, yes.
But just when you think the case is closed, the narrative shifts again. Because in 1998, an English explorer named Benedict Allen goes back into the region and interviews an elderly Kalapalo man named Vajuvi. And Vajuvi completely flips the script.
He completely walked back the murder confession. Vajuvi flatly denied that the Kalapalo had any part in the violence. He reverted back to the story that Fawcett's party stayed with them, were warned not to head east toward fierce Indians, ignored the warning, and walked off into the jungle, their campfire smoke vanishing after 5 days.
So, we have Costin saying the jungle killed them through starvation. We have chiefs bragging about killing them over insults. We have later elders denying it entirely. It's a kaleidoscope of answers. Which brings us to the third major theory, which upends the indigenous murder idea entirely. Killed by bandits.
Right.
And this theory hinges on a very strange physical piece of evidence. In 1979, over 50 years after he vanished, Percy Fawcett's gold signet ring suddenly materialized in a pawn shop in Brazil.
It's such a jarring, anachronistic piece of evidence. I mean, the immediate question is just, how?
Exactly.
If he was killed by completely isolated indigenous tribes deep in the uncharted Xingu, or if he starved to death under a tree, how does a gold signet ring find its way into a commercial pawn shop in a frontier town half a century later.
Right. When I read that, my first thought was that they must have been ambushed by renegades or river pirates, murdered, their bodies dumped, and their valuables looted and eventually pawned. But is there another mechanism here? Could the ring have just traveled through an indigenous trade network?
That is absolutely the most fascinating mechanism to consider, because goods in the Amazon do not stay static. They travel along incredible, complex, ancient indigenous trade routes that link different tribes over thousands of miles.
So they trade with their neighbors who trade with their neighbors.
Exactly. If Fawcett died of starvation or was killed by a tribe, his possessions would have been scavenged. A shiny gold ring, while totally useless for survival, holds novelty value. It could easily be bartered from the Kalapalo to the Kukuro to the Zavantes, passed from village to village for decades.
Wow.
Over 50 years, that ring could slowly migrate hundreds of miles until it finally reached a tribe that had contact with Western prospectors. They trade it for a machete, and the prospector pawns it in town. The ring doesn't definitively prove bandits. It proves the Amazon is a connected web, not a static void.
And then there's the fourth theory, which is the most wild yet somehow perfectly fitting for a man of Fawcett's esoteric background, the jungle commune.
Yes, the commune theory.
This theory was proposed much later, in 2004, by a television director named Misha Williams. Williams actually gained unprecedented access to Fawcett's private family papers and diaries. And based on those writings, Williams posited the theory that Fawcett never actually intended to return to Britain at all.
He argues it was a deliberate vanishing act.
Right. He argues that Fawcett, driven by his theosophical and occult beliefs, went into the Amazon to deliberately disappear. The theory suggests he intended to found a utopian spiritual commune deep in the jungle, a commune that worshipped his son Jack as some sort of messianic figure.
It sounds like the plot of a psychological cult thriller. But when you examine Fawcett's deep immersion in esoteric philosophy, his written beliefs in a coming spiritual paradigm shift for humanity, and his intense, almost reverent bond with his son Jack, Williams argued it wasn't entirely outside the realm of possibility.
Do historians buy it?
Not really. We have to note that this theory is viewed by serious historians as highly speculative. It relies entirely on psychological profiling from his diaries and lacks any concrete physical evidence from the jungle itself.
So, with so many conflicting oral histories, shifting confessions, and wild psychological theories, it's no wonder that desperate searchers eventually turned their focus entirely to physical evidence. They wanted bones! They wanted proof. But the jungle is incredibly good at playing tricks. Nature creates a vacuum, and human desperation rushes in to fill it with false relics.
The total vacuum of solid information led to what was essentially cottage industry of Fawcett finding.
People faking stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Whenever someone wanted funding for a new expedition or wanted their name in the international press, a new relic would mysteriously surface from the green abyss.
Like in 1927, an indigenous tribe was found with an RGS nameplate. Then, in 1933, a theodolite compass was found. Both discoveries triggered massive international headlines. Fawcett's gear found, the mystery solved. But when experts actually examined the serial numbers on these items,
They realized they were complete red herrings.
they weren't his.
Well, the items were absolutely authentic Fawcett gear, but they were not from the doomed 1925 expedition.
How does that happen? How does his gear end up with random tribes if he didn't die there on that trip?
You have to remember his 7 previous expeditions. The 1927 nameplate was from an expedition 5 years earlier. He likely gave it to a chief as a shiny, peaceful gift to secure passage.
Oh, I see.
And the 1933 compass was proven to have been deliberately left behind by Fawcett at a known settlement before he even entered the deep jungle on his final trip, probably because it was too heavy or broken. The tribes simply repurposed the metal. But the press didn't care about the nuance. They wanted a story.
But the ultimate red herring, and honestly one of the most tragic and bizarre episodes in this whole saga, is the 1951 Bones incident. This really shows how toxic the obsession had become.
It really does. This event perfectly encapsulates the desperation for closure from the outside world and the immense, profoundly uncomfortable pressure that Westerners were putting on these indigenous communities.
Let's set the scene for this. It's 1951. Orlando Villas-Boas is a very prominent, highly respected Brazilian activist who works to protect indigenous peoples. He is in the Xingu region, and he receives a set of skeletal remains from the Kalapalo tribe.
They essentially just hand them over.
The tribe essentially says, here you go, these are the bones of the tall white explorer you all keep asking us about. We buried him here. Villas-Boas has them scientifically analyzed in Brazil, and initially there's a prominent claim that they are a physical match for Percy Fawcett.
But the Fawcett family back in England pushes back immediately and aggressively. Percy's surviving son, Brian Fawcett, point blank, refused to accept that the bones were his father's. He demanded much more rigorous testing.
And it gets incredibly bitter between them. Villas-Boas gets defensive. He publicly claims that Brian just wants to keep the mystery alive so he can keep making money off selling books and rights to the story of his missing dad. It becomes a huge media circus.
But the scientific method eventually vindicated Brian Fawcett. Later, independent, rigorous anthropological analysis, specifically looking at the upper jaw, the shape of the palate, and comparing it to Fawcett's known dental records and dentures, conclusively proved that the bones were absolutely not Percy Fawcett's.
They weren't his at all.
No, they belonged to an indigenous man.
Which raises the horrifying question, whose bones did the tribe hand over? This is where the story gets deeply sad to me. Years later, when that explorer Benedict Allen interviewed the Kalapalo elder Vajuvi in 1998, Vajuvi confessed the truth about the bones. He said the skeleton they gave to Villas-Boas actually belonged to his own grandfather, a man named Mugikya.
If we pause and connect this to the bigger anthropological picture, it illustrates a profound cultural tragedy. The Kalapalo had been relentlessly hounded. They were interrogated, accused of murder, and pressured by a constant stream of foreign explorers, heavily armed expeditions, journalists, and government officials for a quarter of a century. Where is the white man? What did you do to the white man?
The pressure must have been unimaginable for them. To make it stop, to appease these powerful, disruptive outsiders who wouldn't take no for an answer, a tribe felt compelled to dig up the remains of their own revered ancestor and offer him up. Here, take him, just leave us alone.
It's awful.
It shows the deeply destructive wake left by Fawcett's ghost. His legend was literally unearthing the dead.
It's a tragic testament to the unequal power dynamics of the era. And because there was no truth to be found, the stories just kept mutating to fit whatever narrative the listener wanted to hear. For instance, take the 1991 account by Danish explorer Arne Falkran.
What did he claim?
He claimed that Orlando Villas-Boas told him a highly specific, secret version of the murder. In this version, the expedition had a river mishap, lost all their trade gifts in the water, and then severely breached diplomatic protocol while being deathly ill.
And in this telling, the Kalapalo decide to kill them out of perceived disrespect. But they differentiate between the men. The younger men, Jack and Raleigh, are thrown unceremoniously into the river. But Fawcett, because he is an older man and therefore considered a distinguished elder, is granted a proper burial on land.
It's a narrative that feels almost too perfectly constructed, doesn't it?
It really does. It ties everything up in a bow.
It neatly explains why no bodies were found. The river washed the young men away. It assigns a rational, culturally specific motive regarding the lost gifts, and it grants a shred of dignity to the elder explorer. But again, it remains completely unverified. It's just another myth built on the mud.
So we have bones that belong to a grandfather, compasses left behind years earlier, rings migrating through pawn shops, and stories that shift with the wind. The physical fate of Percy Fawcett remains a complete mystery. The jungle swallowed him whole. But here's where this deep dive gets really interesting, because the ultimate twist of this entire saga isn't about how Fawcett died. It's about what modern science discovered about the very thing he died searching for.
And this is perhaps the most profound revelation in the entire history of South American anthropology.
I am so excited to talk about this.
For nearly a century, Fawcett was mocked by the scientific establishment for his belief in a vast, ancient Amazonian civilization. He was viewed as a romantic quack chasing a phantom. The prevailing scientific dogma of the 20th century was the pristine myth.
The idea that the Amazon was untouched.
Exactly. The idea that it was a virgin wilderness incapable of supporting large populations because the soil was simply too poor.
But he was looking for Z,
Right.
and in his mind, dictated by that 1753 manuscript, Z meant stone pyramids. It meant giant arches. It meant an Aztec or Mayan-style metropolis plunked down in the middle of the Mato Grosso.
And because he was exclusively looking for stone, he was completely blind to the reality of the Amazon.
Enter anthropologist Michael Heckenberger and the Kukuro people, decades after Fawcett's disappearance. They begin working in the Xingu National Park, which, amazingly, is exactly the region where Fawcett was tromping around looking for his stone city. And what do they find? They uncover a massive archaeological complex known as Kuhukugu.
Kukukugu is staggering in its scale and complexity. It completely shattered the traditional European view of the Amazon. We are not talking about small nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers.
We are talking about an interconnected urban complex of 20 towns and villages. It spans an area of roughly 7,700 square miles, and at its peak, archaeologists estimate that close to 50,000 people lived there. 50,000? It was a highly urbanized, engineered environment. But it wasn't built of stone, because logically maintaining massive stone pyramids in the Amazon basin is wildly impractical, if not impossible.
Why is that?
The jungle would swallow them, the aggressive root systems would tear the masonry apart, and the stone itself is incredibly scarce in the deep alluvial basin. You can't build a Roman aqueduct where there is no quarry. So instead, the people of Kuikugu built horizontally. They built with the materials they had in abundance, earth and wood. When archaeologists actually mapped Kuikugu, they found massive horizontal earthen monuments dedicated to their gods.
They found highly sophisticated engineering. We're talking about deep moats for defense, massive wooden palisades, and complex bridges crossing large sections of the river.
And the urban planning is remarkable. These weren't haphazard camps. They had vast central plazas in these towns, some up to 490 feet across, meticulously cleared and maintained. The communities were linked by incredibly straight, wide dirt roads. And running alongside these roads were engineered canoe canals to facilitate rapid transport and trade during the wet season.
And the logistics of feeding 50,000 people in the jungle is mind-boggling. They were farming mandioca cassava on an industrial scale. They built complex wooden dams and holding ponds for massive fish farming operations, trapping fish during the floods and harvesting them year-round. It's a practice that the modern-day Kikoro descendants actually still utilize. It was a thriving, heavily managed, heavily manipulated landscape.
And we know this not just from ground excavation, but from the chemistry of the soil itself. The mechanism that allowed 50,000 people to thrive there hinges on a concept called terra preta, or ampersol. The Kikoro call it ejipe.
Let's really dig into this, no pun intended. Black Earth. Why is this so important?
To understand terra preta, you have to understand why the Amazon is usually a terrible place to farm. Standard Amazonian soil is known as an oxisol or letasol. It's heavily weathered, highly acidic, and reddish yellow. Because it rains so much, the heavy downpours constantly leach the nutrients deep into the ground, away from the roots.
So if you clear a patch of jungle and try to plant crops, the soil is exhausted within a couple of years.
Which is exactly why scientists thought a huge population was impossible. They couldn't grow enough food.
Exactly. But the ancient Amazonians solved this chemical problem thousands of years ago. In these settlement areas, over centuries, the indigenous inhabitants created rich, dark, incredibly fertile soil through the systematic, intentional deposit of biochar, which is charcoal, along with bone, pottery shards, and organic compost.
How does adding charcoal fix the rain problem, though?
Charcoal is incredibly porous. At a microscopic level, it acts like a sponge. It creates a stable carbon matrix in the soil that physically traps nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, preventing the heavy rains from washing them away. It also creates a perfect habitat for beneficial microbes and fungi.
That is brilliant.
They fundamentally altered the chemistry of the earth to sustain massive agricultural yields. Even today, centuries later, satellite imagery reveals that the forest canopy over Kuikugu differs from the surrounding areas. The vegetation grows differently, more robustly, because the soil was engineered by human hands.
So Fawcett was acting like an astronomer looking for a new planet, but looking through a microscope instead of the telescope. He was standing right on top of his life's work, but because it didn't look like an Indiana Jones stone temple, he couldn't see it. He was looking for a stone needle in an earthen haystack.
The tragic irony is absolute. He was entirely, fundamentally correct that a massive, highly sophisticated civilization existed in the Mato Grosso. He actually found physical evidence of it. On his earlier trips, Fawcett documented discovering large amounts of finely crafted pottery shards buried in the Amazonian mud.
Right. And at Kuikugu, an area that supported 50,000 people, the ground is practically paved with pottery shards. The specific settlement known as X11, located near Lake Kuikugu, which is now called Lagoa Dorada, had 4 connected suburbs. Archaeologists looking at this site realized that X11 essentially was the lost city of Z. Fawcett was walking right over the ruins of the very empire he sought.
But that raises the final devastating question. Why was it in ruins by the time Fawcett got there? Why was the jungle reclaiming it?
Because of a silent apocalypse. Kuikugu was inhabited from about 1,500 years ago until roughly 400 years ago. What happened 400 years ago? The arrival of Europeans on the South American continent.
But here's the terrifying epidemiological mechanism at play. The Europeans hadn't even reached the deep Amazon yet. They were still on the coasts or in the Andes.
He didn't have to reach the Amazon. The diseases they brought, smallpox, measles, influenza, traveled faster than they did.
We talked earlier about how a gold ring could travel hundreds of miles through indigenous trade networks. Viruses travel exactly the same way, but exponentially faster. A coastal tribe can track smallpox from a Portuguese sailor. They trade with an inland tribe who trades with a river tribe who takes a canoe up the Xingu.
And it just spreads.
The viruses swept through the densely packed, highly urbanized populations of Kuikugu like a wildfire. Because they had zero genetic immunity, the mortality rates were apocalyptic, often 90% or higher. The population was decimated long before any European conquistador or explorer ever laid eyes on the plazas.
By the time early European explorers got anywhere near the area, they were looking at a post-apocalyptic landscape. The few survivors had fractured into smaller, more mobile tribes like the Kalapalo and the Kukuro, abandoning the massive earthworks and living in smaller villages just to survive.
And by the time Percy Fawcett arrives centuries later, the rainforest has completely consumed the moats, the roads, and the palisades. The memory of this civilization was only preserved through the oral traditions of the tribes, oral traditions that Fawcett dismissed because he was looking for stone.
It fundamentally reframes the entire narrative of the Amazon. Fawcett's disappearance helped seal the Amazon's reputation in the Western mind as a green hell, a savage, primordial, untouched place that swallowed men whole and defied civilization.
But the discovery of Kuikugu proves that the Amazon wasn't a pristine, untouched wilderness at all. It was actually a highly cultivated, heavily managed garden. It was just a garden that had tragically lost its gardeners.
And this realization is continually being reinforced by modern technology. In 2022, researchers used LiDAR in the Llanos de Moxos region of Bolivia, which is right in the broader neighborhood of Fawcett's explorations.
LiDAR is completely revolutionizing archaeology down there.
How does LiDAR actually work to find this stuff? Because looking at the jungle from the air, you just see a carpet of green leaves.
Well, LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. An aircraft flies over the canopy and shoots millions of laser pulses down at the ground every second. Most of the lasers hit the leaves and bounce back, but a tiny percentage slip through the gaps in the canopy and hit the actual forest floor before bouncing back.
Like shooting a flashlight through a thick screen door.
Exactly. By measuring the exact time it takes for those specific lasers to return, computers can strip away all the vegetation and create a high-resolution 3D topographical map of the bare earth beneath the jungle.
And when they stripped away the canopy in Bolivia, the LiDAR revealed exactly what Fawcett theorized. The geometric ruins of earthen pyramids, elevated causeways miles long, and massive water management infrastructure. The scale of ancient Amazonian urbanization was far grander than 20th century science dared to imagine. Fawcett's vision was right. His architectural expectations and his timing were just tragically wrong.
He was a man out of time looking for the wrong material.
So let's step back and look at the whole picture. We've journeyed from a stubborn, visionary explorer from Torquay, traumatized by World War I, marching into the Xingu with a jade idol and an impossible goal. We've sifted through the agonizing silence, the brutal realities of jungle starvation, the hubris of ignoring indigenous diplomacy, and the heartbreaking stories of tribes offering up their own ancestors' bones just to find some peace from the relentless questioning of the outside world.
It's a heavy, heavy legacy.
And we arrive at the ultimate revelation, that the jungle was hiding a massive 50,000-person civilization right under his boots. He died searching for a myth while walking right on top of a spectacular reality.
It really brings us to a profound, lingering question. With modern technologies like LiDAR now piercing that dense canopy, peeling back the green to reveal sprawling ancient infrastructures that have been hidden for centuries, we have to wonder.
Wonder what?
If the Amazon could hide a complex, engineered civilization of 50,000 people from the world and completely silently erase a famous explorer without leaving a single verifiable trace, what else is waiting out there? What other massive secrets are sitting right now, silently covered by the green canopy, just waiting for us to look with the right lens?
It makes you realize how little we actually know about the ground we walk on. The deep interior of the Amazon is still holding on to its greatest secrets. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this journey into the green abyss has given you some incredible new perspectives on history, ecology, and the limits of human endurance. Keep questioning the map and stay intensely curious.